It's time now for the political analysis of Fromm and Fuller. Al Fromm, former political advisor to President Bill Clinton, and Craig Fuller, former political advisor to both President Ronald Reagan and George H.W. Bush. Good morning, all. Al, I've seen a few commentaries that have been suggesting that the Republicans have not been particularly successful in going after Joe Biden's fiscal management, including his recent record-setting $6 trillion budget. It appears that the polls that the Republicans are looking at are showing that these initiatives are very popular with voters. And so they've had to come up with a different approach. It seems like they are going back to their tried and true playbook of going after Democrats on social issues with major bills on restrictions on transgender folks, abortion, the teaching of critical race theory, as well as voting rights. This certainly seems to be the case with Texas and the governor ready to sign into a law prohibiting abortion after only 6 weeks, even when many women don't even know they're pregnant at that time. Beyond the fairness question, what do you think the Republicans are thinking when they move forward on these controversial issues? And do you think that will help in 2022?
I sort of think this is the same story we've been talking about for most of the year. In one sense, the Republicans aren't really a party anymore. They don't stand for anything. They don't have any alternatives to Biden, so it's hard to criticize him. And as you remember, in 2020, they didn't even have a platform. What they seem to have is a single strategy. And it's to double, triple, quadruple, quintuple down on their base. You know, they drive these hot button issues that stir up their base, divide the country, but stir up their base, try to get their base out. And then they try to make it harder for everybody else to vote. That's simply their strategy. I think they have three fundamental problems. The first is they're a declining minority in a rapidly changing and growing political marketplace. They're essentially the party of white Christians who dominated this country for more than 200 years, in an electorate that is now becoming much less white and much more secular. Secondly, they don't have anything to say. And third, they're faced with the additional problem that Biden's doing a pretty good job at tackling what he said he was going to do during the campaign. And what's left of their party? I'd say they're about 20% Craig Fullers. The good conservatives who have conservative approaches that want to tackle the country's problems. That's probably 25, 30% Trumpers who believe the Trump lie and would do anything for Trump. And the rest of the party's a bunch of scaredy cats. They just follow Trump wherever he wants to go. And, that may help them a little bit in a few gerrymandered congressional districts, but it's the reason they've lost 7 out of the 8 last presidential popular votes. Biden came in and he's done a pretty good job of handling the pandemic. We're getting back to normal. He's getting the country vaccinated, where Trump really failed, even though Trump did a good job of getting the vaccine made. The economy's getting better today. There was a great jobless report again that showed the lowest, that the number of people who are looking for first-time claims on unemployment are down by a third in the last 3 or 4 months. He's also done a pretty good job of pulling the country together, and that's given him approval ratings over 50%, which is hard in today's divided country. And the approval rate of the president's most important thing going into a midterm. So what do the Republicans have going for them? They have the small state bias, that, particularly in the Senate. In the House, they're helped by redistricting because they've done a very good job of getting state legislatures, and they get a higher percentage of representatives than they do of the vote. They have history going for them in a midterm election. And then they have the Democrats going for them because Democrats have a tendency to overreach. These factors may be enough. And I've said that I think the Republicans have a very good chance of winning the House next time. But the Republicans are their own worst enemies. And if they're going to win in 2022, they're going to have to get out of their own way.
Craig, do you see it the same way? It just seems like anytime somebody presents a $6 trillion budget, that's red meat for fiscal conservatives.
Biden deserves, and his administration deserve a lot of credit. They have come up with one heck of a large, dramatic program to, rebuild America, infrastructure, jobs. They've taken care of the two issues we have talked about, as Al points out, over the last several months. They've taken care of the COVID crisis, or they're on their way to getting that resolved. The economy is coming back. I've seen articles written about one of the strongest comebacks ever. So you have to give them high marks. They still have major pieces of legislation to pass, which are filled with elements that are quite detrimental to many of America's companies. Some of the high net worth folks, I'm sure, will object. But in the process of passing the legislation, some of those issues will be resolved. Still, I do think they will have success with their legislative initiatives, and those will put money in people's pockets. They'll engage and employ people on projects that America desperately needs with regard to infrastructure. So that's hard to attack. And as we said, if Republicans want to rally against some of this spending, which traditionally I suppose we would do because of the large deficit, you've got to answer the question when you go home. Why are you against repairing our bridges, our roads, our airports, and supporting people in need? So I think the strategy of the Biden administration has been a successful one, and as Al says, it's been completely responsive to the points on which they ran. Al was generous in saying that the Republicans have a strategy. I'm not sure that's the case. And I think that where I really kind of dispute some of the notion is that there are more than just a few Republicans, quote, like me. As a matter of fact, the good news is there's Republicans who are not at all like me. There's very strong and vocal Black Republicans, Latino Republicans. We have a party that's filled with a lot of different people. A friend of mine said recently, what am I going to do? Where am I going to go? Because many of those voices that we hear most from Republicans, including the governor of Texas, don't represent the views of the mainstream of the Republican Party. Specifically, the issue you mentioned, the governor there in Texas signed the legislation banning abortions after 6 weeks. And while that's extraordinary and unprecedented, what's even more unprecedented is, in some ways, is the measure creates almost literally a vigilante system, so that if you know somebody who's had an abortion, whether you're related to them, even know them, but you're aware that they got an abortion, you can go take to court the clinic that or the medical facility that provided the abortion. And by the way, it doesn't exclude some of the issues like rape, incest, that other measures have traditionally done. So this is an approach. The governor has, and the legislature has the right to pass it. The governor has the right to sign the bill. It's going to be tested. It's going to be tested in courts in Texas, which have not looked favorably upon some of these restrictions, and ultimately may well be tested in the Supreme Court. But the fact that the Republican governor of Texas, is pursuing this attracts a lot of media attention and makes it look as though this is the path Republicans are on as part of a strategy. And I just don't think that's true. If you look at the GOP or the Republican website, this is a place, and this may be amusing to some, but this is a place where people spend a lot of time, pay a lot of attention to what they're putting forward as issues the party's concerned about. And by the way, Al's quite right. When you look at the platform, the last one was written in 2016. Now, lots happened since 2016, but the leadership of the party has identified issues like a strong economy, dealing with the debt crisis, improving health care, taking care of veterans, enhancing the security of our country, providing a equal opportunity for strong, great education for all Americans, dealing with poverty, dealing with energy, dealing with an immigration system that secures our borders, but also strengthens our economy. And then there's one that talks about the values. Our country should value the traditions of family life, religious liberty, and hard work. Well, you know, what people view as traditional family values, I'm sure varies. And I think for a lot of people that read that, maybe the governor of Texas, that means somehow the traditions of the family in which he grew up. But families are quite different these days. And so while that particular area is certainly something that has to be more carefully defined, the fact is that Republicans are concerned and talking about this wider range of issues. But as long as the voices of the Republican Party focus on hot button social issues, that's where the media is going to go. I don't blame them for that. That's where we're going to drive them. And for all those reasons, I'm still of the view that this approach, disorganized as it may be by Republicans, is going to be tested in 2022. I believe it's going to fail, and I believe Republicans will say, as we have in the past, as Democrats have in the past, if we want to win elections, we're going to have to change the path we're on. But I don't see the path changing anytime soon.
The great irony is the Republicans, as Craig said at the end, could fail and still wind up winning the House because, you know, normally an out party will win 27 seats in the first midterm election. They could win 5 and then they've got control of the House. But I'm sure the Republicans on their website list a lot of problems. But the problem isn't that they don't know what the problems are. The problem is they don't offer any solutions. There's a danger in the Biden spending levels. He could overheat the economy. We could have inflation. That would not be a good thing, and that would hurt middle-class people. But right now, the Biden program is really uncontested in the public arena. Biden's been a unifying figure. I've said before that country needed a grandfather, and they've got one right now. And so for all those reasons, Republicans really have a big hill to climb, and they may escape in 2022, but they're going to have a hard time in 2024 unless they develop a platform of their own.
Look, I think one other important thing happened this week that's worth noting and it's consistent with this discussion, and that is that after 29 days, in a fit of pique and frustration, Donald Trump ordered his staff to kill his blog. And I believe on the last day, he topped 1,000 hits, which was running slightly behind the pet care blog that the Washington Post mentioned. I don't think this is something to just ignore and chuckle at. I think in many ways, as Al said, people aren't waking up to launch into some contentious battle on the airwaves. And in this case, borrowing that phrase that people vote with their feet, I think people are voting with their clicks. In other words, they're not really that interested anymore in clicking on what a fellow in Palm Beach has to say every day about the issues we face. I think they're more focused on, their lives, what's going to make their lives better, what's going to protect their family. And those are the kinds of issues that I totally agree with Al about. Republicans have to start focusing on and explaining what they would do to make the lives of people better. It is what Joe Biden is doing, and I think for that reason his popularity is high. But there needs to be a constructive counterweight to some of these measures, and I just think that some of the Republicans who might offer some intelligent options are, in fact, sitting on the sidelines to wait this out a bit so that they're not just personally attacked themselves by a small faction in the Republican Party. But as the guy in Palm Beach says occasionally, time will tell. We'll see.
You really raised an important issue. If nobody cares in the voting public that Trump's screaming, he's going to go out this weekend and scream in North Carolina. Why are so many Republicans in the House and Senate just absolutely petrified of him?
It's one of those numbers games. I wish, I have not run for office myself, but there's nothing like protecting your position in office or winning the election. And they look at the numbers of in a Republican primary, and they simply don't want to face a strong, aggressive, active faction that have been Trump supporters. And whether that's sustainable or not by the Trump faction, I don't know. But for now, it seems that it silences people and actually causes them to embrace ideas that are not always consistent historically with the Republican Party.
Craig Fuller, Al Fromm, thank you so much. We'll see you next week.